Welcome to Momentum Investing, property investing made easy. One of the world's top podcasts on property investing, bringing you the top experts in the field so you can learn firsthand what it takes to create passive income and take control over your financial future.
Welcome to the Momentum Investing podcast. I am so excited to have you here because one of the most requested subjects we ever get here is for raising finance. How do we find more capital for our deals? So today we have a very exciting expert called Pat Hedley. She is a business angel and finance raising specialist, and she's going to share the inner workings to how you can raise capital for your deals. So this is going to be really, really exciting. I promise it's going to be huge value. So really, really looking forward to this episode. I want to thank you if you're a longtime listener to this podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to tune in week after week, every Tuesday when these episodes come out, and listening to our show. If you haven't already, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts as it helps us get the word out to more people. If you're new to the show, welcome. We're super excited to have you here. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you get updates every Tuesday when the next episode comes out. We've got lots of exciting experts coming on, and today is no different with Pat Hedley sharing what it takes to raise finance. Let's get into the interview. Welcome to the Momentum Investing podcast. I am here with Pat Hedley, which is super exciting. This came as a referral from Vanessa Liu, who thought, Pat, you can give an incredible amount of value to our listeners here. So would you like to start by introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about your background and what you do?
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm thrilled to be introduced by someone as wonderful as Vanessa. Yeah. I'm Pat Hedley. I currently invest in and advise growth companies. I spent nearly 30 years of my career with one company, which I know is quite rare. I was a managing director at General Atlantic, which is a global private equity firm. I did a number of things there over the course of my career, including being on the direct investment side, building out their global marketing communications effort, and then also working with portfolio companies in which General Atlantic had invested on human capital issues, C-level search, board development, and talent best practices. Now, every investor thinks they're pretty good at talent management and certainly identifying good talent. And I think there's a lot of value to that because investors have pattern recognition. They meet a ton of people. Therefore, very quickly, they know what good looks like. Well, once I got into the role, I realized that there was even more complexity to it. How do you identify great talent? How do you bring the right people on board to help you build companies to make sure that you can execute on strategic vision? I ended up becoming head of talent at General Atlantic for a little bit. All of these were blank sheet of paper opportunities for me. And frankly, one of the things that I learned early in my career is that you don't need to be an expert in everything. You have to have the ability to go out and find experts and learn quickly and take that information, synthesize it, and make it your own. So I took on that role. It's one thing giving advice to people who head up talent, and it's very different to do it, but I learned a ton doing that. And then about 5 years ago, I decided that I got too far from my true passion and love, which is working with entrepreneurs. So I left. And my goal was to invest in and to advise growth companies. Since then, I've made investments in over a dozen companies. More than half are led by women. I'm very happy and proud to say that. Yeah. And I've taken on several advisory assignments too, a couple of them on the real estate side, so relevant to your audience. In addition to that, 3 years ago, I wrote a book. The title is Meet 100 People. I wrote the book for 3 reasons. One is I am providing advice I wish I had had when I was first starting out. It's advice I give to my 3 adult children, all gainfully employed, I'm happy to say, 2 of them in real estate, and on more than their first jobs, in terms of how they build their networks. And frankly, it's advice I follow myself to this day, even after a very long career and one might argue an incredibly great network. In doing what I'm doing now, I had to build a new network. And I continue to meet people all the time. And I would argue strongly that there is huge value to that. And people who are well networked have a great advantage over those whose networks are more limited or whose perspectives are more siloed. And so I'm happy to talk a little bit about that as we have our conversation, because I think that is incredibly relevant to any investor, certainly anybody investing in the real estate space, to see what's going on. So that's a quick view of me.
Wow, yeah, no, that's an exciting journey, and there's so many things I'd like to get into. So let's let's see how much we have time for. But that's a really exciting journey. So now when you're investing, I love that you say that you've invested in more than half of the companies are led by women. We had Jennifer Justice on the Momentum Investing podcast, and she shared that only about 3% of venture capital dollars are actually spent on women-led companies, which is completely crazy. I actually did a clubhouse with a woman who, it turned out she was I think it was only the 39th Black woman ever to raise $1 million in a pre-seed round. So, and it's crazy that it's low double digits, right?
Yeah, it is crazy. And I think about it this way too. I don't know if you like to fish, but if you go out on a lake to go fishing, what's happening now is that all the fishermen are in one cove and they're all looking for very similar companies. Yet there are many coves on this lake. And I would argue there is a cove that is it's virgin territory. Nobody has gone there, or very few people have gone there. And there are some big fish. There are some big, very attractive companies led by women that people don't even know about. They're operating under the radar. And part of the reason this is true is because of networking, because some of these companies don't have broad networks into the investment community, and the investment community, still mostly dominated by men, do not have strong networks within this female entrepreneurial community. I think this is changing, but this is one of my observations, that it is really a question of expanding and building your network into these different communities that'll open up a whole host of opportunities that you otherwise might not have access to. So there are coves on this lake that people should be fishing, and they're not. And those who actually venture there, and I have done that myself, are amazed at how great these opportunities can be.
Awesome. Well, so I definitely want to get into the networking side, because most of our audience are looking how to raise money. Before we do, I want to take the opportunity, because you are an investor, which means it's always really interesting to ask what it is you are looking for in an investment. So before we go out and find these right people, what is it we want to tell them? How do I convince you to invest in us? How do I present myself to be an exciting investment? And what are you looking for?
Sure. I mean, there are several things that are important to investors in general. I will tell you some things that are particularly important to me. I usually look to invest a little bit beyond the startup stage, because it's important for me to have a business model that is somewhat proven and that I can actually do some work around and understand how much progress has been made. I also very much care about what the product and service is. I personally won't invest in anything that I can't put my name behind and that I'm not totally proud of, that I'm willing to tell people about. And I actually have all the investments I've made listed on my LinkedIn website and or profile, and I'm absolutely proud of every single one of them. Then it comes down to the individual. And so how were they able to convince me to invest? Every single one of my investments came through referral. The introductions came through people that I know. And therefore, I was open to the introduction. I was open and willing to learn more. And I think that, again, gets back to the networking question. Oh. I mean, these were not cold calls to me. They were coming through people I trusted. And I think the word trust is incredibly important as an investor and as in somebody raising money. Trust is what is foundational to kind of the whole ecosystem. And so I only invest in people where I have confidence in them, where I actually have trust in them. And one way to build that trust, especially if you're looking to seek capital, is to start talking to investors well before you need them, and to start establishing those relationships, and to not necessarily have the first phone call be about, I need to raise X amount of money. The first phone call might be about, I'd like to tell you about my business. I'd like to tell you about my plans for the future. I'm going to tell you what milestones I'm going to hit so that I can talk to you in 6 months or 12 months and raise money at that time. And then it's incumbent upon the person raising that money to follow through. In 6 months, call that individual back up and say, it's been 6 months. I want to tell you that I've accomplished my goals. These are the goals I told you 6 months ago. And not only have I accomplished them, I've exceeded them. And here are the exciting new things that are coming in the next 6 months. And then do it again. That process builds confidence. It builds trust, and it starts the beginning of a relationship. And then in a year, if you go back to that individual and say, you know, I've checked in with you twice already, the business is doing incredibly well, or the investments I've made, this property portfolio is exceeding expectations. You know, I have 95% occupancy rates and my costs are under what I expected them to be. Well, guess what? As an investor, I'm pretty impressed. And at that point in time, I would like to have a more serious conversation. If in addition, that individual says, I've also brought on these incredibly important advisors to me. I've built a team and I have really good talent. I have some partnerships with other people that I've developed during this time. All of that increases my confidence that this is somebody who can execute. This is somebody who's willing to get advice from people outside. And this is somebody who I'm willing to make a bet on because I have confidence that they're going to do what they're going to say they're going to do. I mean, it really comes down to that, right? As an investor, I don't want to lose money, and I want to back somebody who's going to deliver on what they promise. Yeah. Those two things are hard to do, extremely hard to do. Even the very best investors in the world have a hard time not losing any money. Most people do lose some money, and finding those people who execute consistently and regularly. That's the challenge.
Oh, it's brilliant. I love it. And I know most of our listeners now, you don't want to wait a year to get the money paid into your account, but sometimes it does take that patience. You got to prove over time that you're in it for the long haul. So
right. And you may have already established some of those relationships where you may have talked to somebody 6 months ago or a year ago, and you don't think to go back to them again and remind them that, you know what, you did what you said you were going to do. I think a lot of people looking to raise money have some of these preliminary conversations. They don't keep a spreadsheet of them and they don't go back to them. Yeah. And the smartest thing anyone can do is be very consistent and proactive about the meetings they have, the follow-up they need to do, and then actually make the follow-up in whatever period of time you said you're going to do that. I get, you know, people come to me, and sometimes it's not the right timing. The really good ones come back to me and we have another conversations. And then the timing can change. And frankly, I made one investment based exactly on that kind of cadence. I met them, they were too early. I met them again, they gave me an update, still too early. I happened to bump into them on the streets of New York. And now I'm thinking, you know what, like the fates are kind of coming together. Let me meet them again. And at that point, they had shown such consistency in delivering on what they had promised that I made the investment.
It's my first mentor. All I can hear right now is him talking in my ear. He always said, success is in the follow-up. And
success is in the follow-up.
Yeah, 100%. That is great advice. So I hope everyone listening that you're taking notes on this is talk to an investor, and whatever their reaction is, continue to follow up with them. Keep a spreadsheet, keep that overview. So yeah, it's really exciting, you know, now that you've found an investor to go and present them. But the question is, you have your book, you know, Meet 100 People. So what is the concept there? How do I identify, how do I meet these exciting investors and open these doors for myself?
Sure. Well, I think the very first thing that you do, and this is the first step that I outline in my book, is frankly, you have to look in the mirror. You have to spend some time with yourself. You actually have to sit down in a quiet room for 15 minutes to a half hour and write down what you hope to accomplish. And I suggest people write it down because then it's real. You have to think about who would you like to meet? Who are people that you currently know who can get you there? So you need to almost map out where you're going. Map out where you're going, map out those people who can be supportive to you, and then you have a plan of action. I think in meeting people, the best and easiest way is through referrals, right? And the best way to get referrals is to reach out to people you already know, have a conversation with them, tell them what you're up to, tell them specifically what you're looking for, and then ask them if they know of other people who can be helpful to you. Reaching out to people for advice is a very good way to start this process. And when you do that, you have to do it with authenticity. You have to do that with the spirit of being helpful to them, if you can be helpful to them. And you have to do it with the spirit that you need to listen to what they're saying. So those three things, while they may seem very simple, there's something that you have to think about. Once you start getting referrals to the right people, then it becomes easier. And people, when you're referred to someone, the likelihood of them saying yes is much higher than if it's just a cold call. But even if you do cold calls, the outreach has to be compelling. You can't just say, I saw your profile on LinkedIn and I thought we should connect. That does not cut it. What you should say instead, I saw your profile on LinkedIn. I see that you're an investor in this certain area. I too have made investments, or I'm seeking to make investments in that area. I've done a lot of work in this area. I'd like to share my efforts with you. And I would like to share my efforts with you. And I would like to learn from you as well. The really important thing is you should not ask for too much. Ask for advice, ask for 15, 20 minutes, plan on more, but ask for a short period of time so it's hard to decline on that. And then also try to do it by video as opposed to an email or a phone call. I think there's huge value to seeing somebody in person. In person would be great in our new world once we're all vaccinated.
Yeah.
But the next best thing to being in person is to do it by Zoom. And that's now become culturally accepted, probably one of the few silver linings of this whole pandemic, but it is much better to meet someone in person, or by Zoom than just to have a phone call. And the other piece of advice I give to people is a no today is not necessarily a no forever. No is just a point in time. And if somebody says, no, I don't have time, or no, no, I'm not interested for whatever reason they give, say, can I touch base with you in another month, another 3 months, whatever the request is. That goes over very differently. And it actually makes you feel better too, than the alternative. I think a lot of people have certain fears or obstacles they've put in their own way when it comes to networking and to reaching out to others. And one of them is just the fear of the word no. And I would say you can't be afraid of no. I mean, you have to hear a ton of no's to get the yes, and just view it as practice and learning. The other worry is you hear nothing at all. You hear crickets. And again, try again. Persistence matters. It should be polite persistence. And perhaps that individual was busy. Perhaps your email got lost in their spam filter. There's so many things that are not directly related to you that could cause somebody not to respond. I think you have to, give it another chance and try again. And frankly, some people are afraid of their own success because, the best thing that could possibly happen is that you have a meeting. And for some people, that's actually kind of scary, because if you have the meeting, then, then you're live, then you have an opportunity to talk and converse. And I would say if anyone agrees to a meeting, they're doing it because they also want to learn. They also want to be helpful. Senior people want to be helpful to people who are much younger. Somebody helped them along the way. They have a willingness to give back, and you have something to offer them too, especially if you've done your homework and you're well versed in the topic that you want to talk about. There's an awful lot of sharing that can take place, and these meetings can be unbelievably beneficial over time.
Very cool. So essentially what you do then, and I love that concept, what you say about sitting down and mapping out the whole plan and the strategy. That was brilliant. That is, creating an action plan. So you start out with your contacts and who they might be able to refer you to. But I do know that a lot of people listening might not feel that they have contact. And that's where you would go to somewhere like LinkedIn, connect with someone and write truly a personal message to someone and try to create a connection through that.
Right.
And
I would argue strongly that there is not a single person who does not have a network, because if you live in a certain location, other people live there too. And if you have neighbors, if you have relatives, if you have schoolmates, if you're an alumnus or an alumna of any kind of university, you already have a network. And if you have something in common with someone, the chances of them connecting and talking to you are much higher. I have so many anecdotes, but I have one in particular of a young man who reached out to me many years ago. It was later in the evening. I was still in my office. My assistant didn't answer the phone. And this young man with a nervous voice said to me, "I would love to get your advice." And frankly, the only thing he and I had in common was we grew up in the same hometown. And I spent 45 minutes with this young man, giving him advice and listening to what he wanted to do for that very simple reason. I couldn't not do it. He was much younger. I could tell he was early in his career. He was super nervous reaching out. And I gave him huge credit for being brave enough to reach out. And with that one little thing, our hometown, which is not a place that's on the map in any respect, it made the difference. So even if it's something like that, you may as well do it. Anyone who has any people around them has the start of a network, and that start can lead you to a much broader and even richer network over time.
that's awesome. And one thing I was thinking as well, because one of the things we've seen a lot of networking is obviously, so many people are going out and asking, for example, I would go to you and ask you to give me advice or give me value, so to speak. But how would you, if you're just starting out, how would you go into it with, if I was to give you value, what kind of value, if I'm completely green, in this just starting out, what value do I have to give someone like you who already is established and has contacts and done investments? Where can I bring value to someone like yourself?
There are so many ways in which you can bring value. First of all, more experienced people really like to talk to younger people because they have a window onto the world that is very different from their own. Young people have perspectives that I don't. One of the things I ask any young person is, what are your favorite apps? And we have a wonderful conversation about that because they have exposure to things that I might not know about. Let me tell you one brief story about how one young person helped me in ways she could never have predicted and had made a huge impact on my life. A young woman came up to me after an event and asked me to go to coffee to give her career advice. She went to the same school that I did, and of course I agreed. We had coffee together. We had a wonderful time. We actually really connected. We connected on a shared love of Asian food. I mean, go figure. You never know what you connect with people on. She invited me to go to lunch in Flushing, Queens in New York, where I had never been before, because she said it was like going to China without getting on an airplane. Several weeks later, we had lunch together, and I had a wonderful time, and I tell the story often. Several months later, she reached out to me and said, "I saw there was a call for speaker at TEDx. I would like to nominate you." And to be honest, I would have never seen this call for speakers. I've always had a secret bucket list to do a TED Talk, and this was my opportunity. And so I said, "Yes, please nominate me." She did. I was accepted. I've never prepared for anything more in my life than this TEDx talk. And I did it. And it is online today. I encourage your readers to take a peek at it. It was such a wonderful, meaningful experience for me. I think the people that have viewed it find it to be valuable as well. And it would never have happened if it weren't for this young woman who I was giving advice to. So the point of the story is you have to know who you're talking to. You have to, through conversation or whatever, figure out what is of interest and value to them. And then when you see something that they might not, send it to them. Send them a book recommendation. Send them an article. Send them a suggestion for a great Asian restaurant in your neighborhood. Whatever it is, give them some information and share with them. And any young person can do this. You don't have to be experienced to be able to determine You know what? I actually am a big reader. I love reading. So if you come up with a great book that you've read and share that with me, that's actually quite valuable to me. Or if you tell me about your favorite apps, that's actually valuable to me too. Everyone has something to offer. You just have to think about it slightly differently, and you have to have a conversation which helps you get there.
I love it. Yeah. So it all comes down to that personal connection in the end, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Well, I really, really appreciate you taking this time to join us. And I know our listeners want to connect with you more. How can they, if they want to learn more from you, how do they find you?
Sure. There are two ways that you can find me. One is you can visit my website, which is meet100people.com. 100 is 100, so meet100people.com. And secondly, you can go on LinkedIn. Pat Hedley is my name. I post various things on my LinkedIn profile. And I also occasionally write blogs on Medium. So on medium.com, just search for Pat Hedley and you'll find the various posts that I've put there over time.
Awesome. Well, I'll add the links to all this in the show notes so everyone can find it. Pat, thank you so much for joining us.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. Everyone who's listened, thank you so much for joining us. I got some exciting news in a moment, so please stay tuned, and I'll see you again next week.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this week. I hope you got a lot of value and you have some new ideas that you can implement to raise capital for your deals. If you're not already started in property, feel free to join our free online course at momentumgift.com. That's momentumgift.com. There you can claim our free course, The 3 Simple Steps to Property Investing and the 3 Most Common Mistakes New Investors Make and How to Avoid Them. Now, next week is going to be a very special episode because it is our 50th episode. So I thought we'd do a bit of an anniversary episode. I'm going to sit down and talk a little bit about our investing philosophies, what we see going on in the market right now, and also what's going to be happening with Momentum Property Education and with the Momentum Investing podcast in the years to come. I know I could have waited to episode 52, which would have marked the 1-year anniversary, but 50 was just so much more a round number than 52, don't you think? So we chose to do it now on the 50th episode. If you want to give us a review on Apple Podcasts, I'd really appreciate it. It helps us get the episode and the exposure for the podcast out, helps us attract more attractive speakers, because we got some brilliant speakers lined up and I'm hoping to have many more in the future. So thank you so much for being a listener. Hope you got some value from this episode and I hope I get to connect with you again in the future.